The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Every time I hear Libertarian Party presidential candidate Gary Johnson talk, I get the sense that on many issues, he can go about 3 talking points deep, right? An initial general talking point, a slightly more specific one, and then maybe one fact that makes it sound like he really knows what he's talking about. But on some issues, not all, that is basically it for depth. And that became clear in what I can only describe to you as a hair-raisingly cringeworthy moment on MSNBC when he was asked, what about the Syrian city of Aleppo? And he hadn't heard of Aleppo. If you're watching, I am warning you, I would not have children in the room here. I would not be eating anything at this time. I would definitely be sitting, because the look on his face when he is asked about Aleppo, it's bad. Let's take a look.
Category.
What would you do if you were elected about Aleppo?
About
Aleppo.
And what is Aleppo?
You're kidding.
No.
Aleppo is in Syria. It's the epicenter of the refugee crisis.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Well, with regard to Syria, I do think that it's a mess. I think that the only way that we deal with Syria is to join hands with Russia to diplomatically bring that at an end. But when we've aligned ourselves with, when we've supported the opposition, the Free Syrian Army is also coupled with the Islamists, and then the fact that we're also supporting the Kurds, and it's just a mess.
Yeah.
And that this is the result of regime change that we...
Total deer in headlights, right? I mean, he looks like he just had some bad New York City food cart chicken, and it's starting to hit the wrong way in his stomach or something like that. What's the credibility of, oh yeah, of course. Well, here's my answer. That answer, after you say, what's Aleppo, is not going to be particularly credible. And then he goes to, well, I would just do an alliance with Russia on this, which, by the way, is what Donald Trump suggested in many ways to go after ISIS, and what President Obama essentially has done, at least insofar as the coordination of airstrikes. I feel bad for Gary Johnson. I feel so bad that I think we need to take a break so I can sort of regain my composure. And the phone lines are already blowing up, and we will take some calls after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Will Franklin. Will, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. And of course, this is viewer and listener supported media. You can join Will, sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Let's take some phone calls. The number is 617-830-4750. We have the first caller. Caller, please identify yourself. Where are you calling from, and what's on your mind today?
Hello. I'm from sort of the deep south area and all this stuff where we got kind of crazy things going on. But I wanted to note that with your show, compared to most of the shows I see on YouTube and otherwise, it is not polarized.
It's not polarized. What do you mean? Do you mean that the audience is not polarized?
No, I mean in general, like how you report, because it seems to me that with a lot of shows and in general, the people kind of seem like they feel the need to be polarized, like extremely to the left, extremely to the right. You know, for example, you talked about safe spaces and such.
Yeah. And
you did it, you know, without being like, gosh, dang the SJWs, and at the same time, you weren't like, well, everyone should just be able to completely shut themselves off from the world, you know.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, right. Well, listen, no, I mean, and what's interesting about what you're saying is I feel like the show has never been more polarized in the sense of I feel like I've never been more liberal, and I am not afraid of saying that. I think what you're sort of pointing out is I don't always jump on what's the popular left bandwagon if I believe it doesn't represent liberal principles, like the safe space type of thing. I mean, is that, I don't want to, with peace and love, I'm submitting to you the possibility that I'm sort of rephrasing what you're saying.
Yeah. You definitely are like more left leaning, but you're not feeling the need to like just go with that, so to speak, team, like, oh, everything's acceptable as long as it came from this side, that kind of thing.
I don't think we've ever had a better caller. What is your name, by the way? I didn't catch it.
My name's Sophia.
Cynthia. Okay, Cynthia from the Deep South.
No, Sophia.
I'm sorry, say it once more.
I'm sorry, Sophia.
Sophia. Okay. Sophia from the Deep South. Thank you so much for the call. I appreciate your analysis. And I hope more people sort of see that this is an opinion show, but that it is not just checking the boxes of what's a fad right now among the left. Thank you so much for the call. Okay, we are taking calls at 617-830-4750. The next caller is now joining me. Name, town, and I would love to hear what's on your mind today.
Hi, my name's Judy. I'm from Texas. And I'm calling because the EpiPens are so expensive.
Yeah.
I did find a website in Canada that sells them online for $50 instead of the $600 they charge here. So this is kind of a public service thing for people that need these EpiPens and can't afford them.
Yeah,
and
over the weekend. I'm sorry. I was going to mention over the weekend, I was at a wedding in Pennsylvania. And my girlfriend was stung by a bee for the first time. And although we were of joking, someone said, I hope you don't need an EpiPen because of what's going on with the price gouging on EpiPens. You know, I don't, obviously I'm not giving medical advice here. There are many, officially, but hold on 1 second. Officially, the line is, don't buy anything from another country because the FDA can't guarantee its safety. But the reality is that many of the things in other countries are actually regulated more strictly by that country's equivalent of the FDA. So what I would say to people is do your research if you're looking at getting something from Canada, right?
Exactly. And it's a legitimate website. I went to the website and, I would trust Canada, especially for something like this.
Yeah.
I also found out that the cost to make these things, not the packaging, but the cost, the drug itself, 51 cents.
So even at $50, that is quite a nice little profit there, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I'd rather give it to Canada than $600 to somebody else that's a millionaire already.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. Thank you so much for the call, and glad for making the audience aware of that. We've had so far 2 women phone callers, which ties the total of female phone callers we've had, and both from the South. The number is 617-830-4750. I am thrilled to be joined by our next caller. Who's on the line now? No? Do we have the next caller? We do. Can you hear me, caller?
Hey, wow, I wasn't actually expecting to get on here.
You're on. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm Scott, and I'm calling from Ohio.
Okay, great. What's on your mind, Scott?
And well, I know you guys have been doing a lot of like anti-regressive left videos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to take your question, but let me just say real quick, just because of the framing of the question. I've sort of stepped away from the term regressive left because I feel like it's become a catch-all to just insult liberals and critique any idea that conservatives don't like. Basically, what I try to do, and I know not everybody agrees that I succeed, is if I see fads on the left that I find to be fundamentally authoritarian or illiberal, I'll sort of call them out. But yeah, okay, my reframing aside, what can we answer about that?
I'm curious if you guys would ever consider going on like one of those anti-regressive left like online podcast videos, like, for example, Drunken Peasants or something like that?
Well, listen, I mean, I go on shows all the time that may intersect partially or more with my political views. So yeah, I mean, any podcast invitation I'll receive, I'll sort of evaluate the time requirement and how much value I think will be created by being on it. I would not make the decision to go on a podcast or not necessarily because of the political beliefs. I mean, if some white supremacist podcast with 10 listeners comes to me, I would sort of consider the fact that I'd be speaking to 10 white supremacists and deciding whether to do the show. But I'm totally open to all invitations from other podcasts and shows.
All right, because I know you made that video saying how you wouldn't mind going on to those shows, and I wanted to see because they said they were looking for people to go on the show. So I was thinking maybe you could contact them or they could contact you or whatever, and it'd be cool because I watched both of you. It sounds like
you are, I don't know if you work in PR, but you're absolutely greasing wheels here and making connections between people. I would be thrilled to entertain an email from the Drunken Peasants. And I really, really appreciate the call. Thanks so much. 2 calls from the South and 1 from Ohio today. We'll keep taking calls, right? 617-830-4750. Do we have our next caller with us? We do. Who's on the line with me? Name and town is great to start with.
Hey, this is Christian again from Northeast Kingdom of Vermont.
What's on your mind today?
So, David and Lewis, I wanted to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on the way a society should value a space program?
Let me first ask you one other question.
Space.
How long has it been since you listened to the show?
I haven't watched any of the most recent episodes, but I watched maybe a few days ago.
Okay, well, I just want to tell you, and I say this with utmost respect, peace, and love, to quote the great Ringo Starr. I don't know if you know, but we announced about 7 weeks ago that Lewis was leaving the show, and he is gone. So there is no Lewis today, but if I may, I would love to answer your question.
Did I accidentally say David and Lewis? I meant David and Jason.
Okay, got it. Okay. So let me deal with the question
sorry.
here. You know what? Sometimes I say Lewis too. It's happening to all of us. I think that society does not value space programs nearly enough. I think that it is one of the ways that we can actually work productively across these sort of arbitrary country borders that we know are often the source of a lot of problems, although in many ways in modern society, they are of course necessary. And I'm sort of we've interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson about this, and really NASA spending, this type of spending, should really be thought of as a good investment because number one, we may need to find another planet to live on if we keep destroying this one. Number two, as I mentioned, it can foster a cooperation between countries. And number three, in the same way that we've seen technology that we can use on Earth come from space exploration technology, I would expect that that would continue to happen. So I am very pro space exploration type spending. Okay. I don't know if we lost him, but let's move on. That is my answer. Let's take one more phone call today at 617-830-4750, or maybe 2 more. We'll see. Who's on the line with us now?
Yes, hello, David. It's Jared from Downingtown, PA.
Always great to hear from you. Hey, is Downingtown near New Hope, Pennsylvania?
New Hope? Give me 1 second. I'm going to just Google it really quickly.
If you've got to Google it, I'm guessing it's probably not. That is my sense there. I'm curious because I was at a wedding in New Hope, Pennsylvania over the weekend, and it's very close. I mean, I think it's just a few miles from the New Jersey border, and it was a very, very new and unique experience. There were a lot of people praying in the restaurant where I had lunch as their meals were brought out, and it was just generally a very different experience for me. In any case, feel free to comment on that, or I'm glad to answer a question.
Well, that's in Bucks. I'm in Chester County, PA. But what I wanted to talk about is Lewis.
Okay.
Like, how's he doing? And since Where's he at currently?
So I spoke to Lewis this morning, in fact, because we had a technical question that Lewis was uniquely suited to answer for us. Lewis seems to be doing well. It was about 10:45 local time when I called him, and it sounded like I had roused him from a very, very deep sleep. So I've not spoken to him. It was like a 2-minute conversation. I'm going to speak to him later today, and maybe I'll be able to have a better report next week. But if the fact that he sounded sleepy at 10:45 a.m. is any indication, I think Lewis is doing pretty well.
Very nice. And do you know if he could, like, I know this is going to sound pretty crazy because you're not really Lewis, but do you know if Lewis could start his own, like, not so much podcast, but like something like on YouTube where he'd like a 30-minute where he, like when Ed Schultz was taken off MSNBC, he'd start doing like these little 30-minute things on YouTube,
right?
Where he just run down like what's on the news or what's on his mind or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. A bunch of people have suggested Lewis do something, maybe a music review show. I don't know. Of course, I can't speak for Lewis, but I am going to, when I speak to him later today, I will tell him that numerous people are on record saying they'd like for him to do something, and I think it would be great if he would do that. Thank you so much for the call. I do have to move on. I hope to be able to speak to you again in the future. Okay, guys, do we have another call? This is the last call for today. The number is always 617-830-4750. Who am I talking to? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm calling from Troy, Ohio.
Very cool. What's your name and what can we do for you today?
Hi, I'm Caleb, by the way. Love your show. Watch it all the time.
Thank you.
I was wondering, with all of the YouTube demonetization stuff that's been going on lately, I understand that segments of your radio show appear on YouTube, and you probably have a partnership with YouTube for ads.
That's correct.
But you also have private ad partnerships, correct, for your radio show?
That is indeed true.
I was wondering if your private ad partnerships had any influence on the type of content that you produce.
Well, listen, I mean, it would I believe that they don't, and I've never had an advertiser ever tell me that the content on the show has to be modified. I've told the story of where once I was approached by a chemical company, a very well-known chemical company, and they were interested in advertising because they had a new progressive engagement initiative and they wanted to reach more progressives, blah, blah, blah. I just said no. I mean, there was no fit for it. And although we had never talked about that company specifically, we have for a long time been very critical of this industry. This is the same type of industry where you end up seeing things like the Teflon byproducts that cause cancer and so many other things. And it's only happened once or twice, but if I see a potential conflict, we turn the advertiser down. Our advertisers are, for example, like Warby Parker, which makes glasses. This is just nothing that I could even imagine could at some point be any kind of a conflict. They wouldn't even dream of telling us what to do on the show. So my view is the content has not been influenced by advertisers, but I'm not in the same way that I could critique CNN and say, even though they say they're not influenced, in some way without them even knowing it, they could be influenced by advertisers. It's possible. We really have very few private advertisers, and I can say with significant certitude that it is not playing any role in the content of the show. And you know what? To go further, yesterday, of our 9 videos that we uploaded, 4 were initially not monetized by YouTube. I appealed all 4 of those designations, and fortunately, YouTube determined that those 4 videos actually are eligible for monetization. They're advertiser friendly. But my plan is to continue going forward, and unless it becomes a financial issue, and if that happened, I would say to the audience, we need more members, because otherwise I've got to start focusing on stories that will monetize. I hope that never happens, by the way. So far, it is not affecting our model. Okay.
All right, great.
Yeah, thank you.
I didn't want to sound like I was accusing you of anything.
No,
I was just curious.
You're asking the exact question you should be asking as a smart media consumer, which is, hey, if there are advertisers, I'd love to know more about that relationship. And I'm completely transparent in that, and maybe we'll do an even longer segment on it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the call. We do have to move on with the show. That is going to do it for today. 617-830-4750 is always the number for phone calls, and we will take more phone calls soon.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
In discussions of Islamic terror, very often this idea comes up of who are the real Muslims? Is anyone who says they are a Muslim a real Muslim? Is anyone who says they are inspired by their interpretation of the Quran, for example, a Muslim? Or can we write off anyone who commits an atrocity under the name of Islam as being, quote, not really Muslim? This is a conversation that I actually had with Mark Sandlin back in 2013. What is real Christianity? And it is so relevant now in the context of these discussions of, well, are they real Muslims or not? Is the candidate a true Christian or not? So we're going to go back to my great conversation with Mark Sandlin from October of 2013. Let's take a look. I'm joined today by former Navy Chaplain Gordon Klingenschmitt. Check out his website, prayinjesusname.org. Also joined by Reverend Mark Sandlin. Mark is a Presbyterian minister, co-founder of the Christian Left, also blogs for the Huffington Post and a number of other publications. Gentlemen, it's really great to have both of you here today. You may not know this, but my audience certainly does. I am not an expert in Christianity. I was born into a Jewish family and raised relatively secular, but it's impossible to ignore that Christianity is very involved in the politics of the United States, so it's a topic that we often discuss. So I want to go first to the chaplain. Chaplain, you and I have talked about a variety of issues. We've talked about gays and gay marriage, abortion, the teaching of evolution, Obamacare, single-payer health care, poverty. What do you think right now should be the most important and paramount issues to American Christians in the political system?
Well, thank you, David, for having me on your show once again, and God bless you and God bless your listeners in Jesus' name. As a former Navy chaplain, I believe in the Constitution of the United States. I'm an Air Force Academy graduate. I defend the First Amendment among all the other constitutional amendments. And religious freedom is a critical issue that the church and my constituents are very concerned about. So now, sadly, under the Obama administration, I feel like, and many of my friends feel like, Christian values are under attack and being legislated out of existence by the liberals in the Obama administration who want to, for example, redefine traditional marriage instead of, as Jesus defined it, between one man and one woman. They want to pass strike down the Defense of Marriage Act, enact the ENDA bill, Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And we've seen this trend going on for many years. This is not new to anyone in your audience. But you asked me, what are some of the critical issues?
Well, no, I mean, I think that's good in the interest of getting Reverend Mark in, because that right there was chock full of stuff that I'm sure he wants to address. So, Reverend Mark, just even on the basis, do you agree with Chaplain Klingenschmidt's assessment that Jesus made it clear what a marriage should be, or do you disagree there?
Yeah, I would have to, obviously, I think, disagree with that. Anyone who follows us on the Christian left knows that we believe that biblically there's actually all kinds of representations of what blessed relationships look like in God, particularly when that kind of language is used to kind of deny rights to folks who are in same-sex relationships. So I think it's pretty clear that Jesus was much more interested in love and bringing people together and in relationships where people trust each other and care for each other and promote the greater good through it.
So you don't believe that do you think, let's to address the chaplain's other assertion there, do you think there has been a significant change in terms of religious freedom under President Obama?
Religious freedom, I would think, actually has been opened up. We've seen more and more acceptance of a greater variety of religions. I applaud Chaps for his defending the rights of other religions on the naval ships to practice their religion. And I think that's what we ought to be doing in the U.S. Rather than trying to legislate our particular beliefs, we need to be trying to look for higher moral grounds and open up the platforms so that more and more religions are respected and accepted and aren't having other people's perspectives forced on them.
Chaplain, feel free to jump in.
Well, thank you. As a conservative, traditional Christian, some people may say that I'm on the Christian right. My partner here, Reverend Mark, is on the Christian left, or so he describes himself. I want to suggest that the definition of Christian, we need to be very careful about this, should be somebody who follows Jesus Christ, somebody who agrees with Jesus, and somebody who believes the Bible. I think a lot of people out there on the so-called left are trying to call themselves Christian, but at the same time, they don't believe in Jesus Christ, they don't let him rule their heart and mind, and they don't believe the Bible. Jesus Christ defined marriage between one man and one woman, and people who disagree with that should not call themselves Christians or followers of Jesus.
And David and Chaps, I think this is what this type of conversation always ends up, unfortunately, unraveling to, is who gets to call themselves Christian and who doesn't, and who owns the right interpretation of what Jesus said and what Jesus didn't say. And I think right there at the end, you did a very important hermeneutical move in pointing to the fact that Jesus was using the Old Testament, his Jewish Holy Scripture, to understand things too. So I think we have to look at all of it. And so I think it's a little dogmatic and a little limiting when we pick one verse, we quote it and say that it represents a full understanding of who we're supposed to be or what Jesus taught, because Jesus grew up with all these other scriptures as well, and he frequently referred to them and they informed who he was. So I don't particularly get into having a debate of who's Christian and who's not. I think that that's a little presumptive.
To propose another topic through which we can kind of explore the differences in our views here, the chaplain brought up the issue of marriage equality. I want to talk a little bit about healthcare. There has been a significant conservative Christian movement against the Affordable Care Act, kind of colloquially known as Obamacare. And further, there's also been sentiment that single-payer healthcare or healthcare for all would somehow not be in line with Christianity for some reason. I'll go first now to Reverend Mark. Yeah. Reverend Mark, is your sense that the Jesus view would be everyone should be provided with some basic level of health care, or is that not a proper interpretation?
A few things I notice about Jesus. Anytime anyone asks for health care, Jesus gave it to them. So just from practice, I would say that's something that was important to Jesus. Now, the argument is usually that, Jesus didn't force the government to do it. Well, what Jesus was really doing was making sure that those in need had it. So I would say if we're capable of making sure that folks who need health care had it without the government's intervention, then that's great. The reality is we haven't.
Chaplain, you've been very outspoken against Obamacare. How do you what do you think of Reverend Mark's comments?
Well, I agree with his sentiment that God should be the healer. We should look to God for our healing and not to the government. I think, sadly, the socialist left has now been trying to replace private charities and Christian hospitals or regulate them into obscurity or even to take over with government power some of the things that Christians have been doing for 1,000 years. I believe in free market enterprise. I believe in private charity. Sadly, since President Obama has been elected, 4.9 million working class Americans have lost their health care insurance between ages 25 and 64, and that hurts everybody's ability to have health care. So socialism is not a way to give more health care. Socialism actually takes health care away from people, and it's anti-Christian. When I pray for the sick, by the way, I was in India last year. I preached 34 times in 35 days in 4 cities. We prayed for the sick, and by the power of God, people were healed, and we saw miracles. So I think God should be the healer, and we should not look to government as if it is a God.
Mark, I think there's probably a lot you would want to say to that, but because we have limited time and Chaplain has kind of opened the door to discussing something else, the Chaplain has talked about faith healing, and we've had cases where parents have actually now had to face charges for providing only faith healing and no traditional medical treatments to their kids. The chaplain on my program has also talked about exorcisms, and that he personally, with about a 50% success rate, has been able to exorcise the homosexuality out of people. Is that in line with your understanding of Christian teachings, or does that sound like something that is outside of Christianity?
I think there's two different questions going on there. One is healing and one is exercising. And I'll say right up front, I have certainly never been privileged to be in the presence of any of that actually happening in a way that I could verify that that was what occurred. So from a purely experiential point of view, it's difficult for me to completely understand, although we have biblical text of healings, of course. I've never seen it, and I've never seen it particularly verified. For those who would like to replace healthcare with biblical healing or praying for someone to heal, I would challenge them to drop their own healthcare and not go to a hospital and just pray about it. I suspect long run we're going to decide not to do that.
And then the exorcism, because like I said, the chaplain says he has this 50% success rate, that a lesbian once wept and then was no longer interested in other women. And he has a lot of these stories, which to some people seem hard to believe.
Yeah, I think that comes down to a basic understanding of why a person has attraction to someone of the same sex. You know, do you believe that it is a possession of the devil? Or do you believe that, as science is slowly beginning to show us some signs of, that there's also parts of that has to do with how we're wired in our DNA and our structure and who we are, and some about our environment and the people that we find ourselves attracted to. So,
Chaplain, feel free to address that. I know this is an important topic to you.
I don't want to mischaracterize my position. I think Reverend Mark suggested that I'm against healthcare because I believe God is the healer. That's not what I said at all. I'm in favor of healthcare. I'm a member of the Knights Hospitalers, which is the organization, the Knights of Malta, that founded the first hospitals, which they just unearthed in Jerusalem over 1,000 years ago. With regard to exorcism, here's what Jesus taught, right? And you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially in Matthew 10, where Jesus commanded his disciples, and I try to be one of his disciples, to heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, raise the dead. And that doesn't mean we have the power to do that, but we should try, and we should certainly pray that God will give us that power to heal people who are ruled by demons. Not everybody's ruled by a demon. There's not a demon behind every bush, but there is perhaps an evil influence behind every human sin. And when you can't define sin, there is no such thing as sin, then of course you don't believe in the devil. But if you believe the Bible, if you believe what Jesus says, there is right and wrong, the devil is influencing people to sin, and the Spirit of God is influencing people to choose holiness, then in every human moral decision, you have an opportunity to agree with God or to disagree with God, to agree with the devil or disagree with the devil. And those are just natural choices that people make in the context of human morality every day. That's why sexual immorality, because it is defined as wrong outside of the context of traditional marriage between one man and one woman, sexual immorality is a temptation. It's a sin. And therefore, we consent to allow the devil to rule that part of our life, and we can renounce that. We can walk away from that. It's not part of your DNA. And David, we've talked about Punnett squares and Mendelian genetics and how homosexuality cannot be inherited, because when a man mates with another man, they don't have kids. And so the only way they have is to recruit the children of heterosexual couples into that movement, and therefore it's not genetic, it's not biological, it is a moral choice, and therefore it can be repented of, and you can invite God to rule that part of your heart.
Reverend Mark, is this discussion of homosexuality as a chosen sin and everything else that the chaplain is talking about, is this a productive area for Christianity to focus?
No, and I actually, within my own denomination, have this discussion, is that, frankly, even if you think that the English interpretation of the Bible is literally a correct translation in the places that it addresses homosexual relationships, which is only 7. In general, the Bible is disinterested in this subject, and we put probably more than 50% of our time, it would seem, into dealing with this issue. I think it's a distraction from what we should be doing, which is seeking justice and equality, trying to encourage people to work towards peace and getting along with their neighbors no matter what they look like.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I think we've said it all. We've been speaking to former Navy Chaplain Gordon Klingenschmitt. Check out his website, prayinjesusname.org. Also, Reverend Mark Sandlin, who's a Presbyterian minister. He's the co-founder of the Christian Left and blogs on Huffington Post and elsewhere on the internet. Thanks to both of you for joining me today.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Mark. God bless you in Jesus' name.
You too, David and Jess. Good to see you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let's answer some audience questions. These are questions that come in maybe via email, maybe via voicemail, or Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, our Reddit discussion forum. We'll take them in all forms. First question is from Carson saying, are votes legitimate or worth anything if a big portion of the electorate doesn't vote? I'm going to interpret it as, are election results legitimate? I think that's probably what Carson means here. Are election results legitimate or worth anything if a big portion of the electorate doesn't vote? Well, if a big portion of the electorate doesn't vote, what you have is a system in which few people are deciding who are our elected officials or what ballot initiatives pass or not. So if there hasn't been rigging of votes, if there hasn't been voter suppression where people who tried to vote were not able to, either because of fabricated and trumped up, kind of weird to say trumped up in the concept.
Pun intended?
Yeah, pun not intended, but actually a pun. Unless you have those specific instances, if a lot of people just never cared to vote, it's still a legitimate election result. It is only worth as much as saying we have a representative democracy in which only a small portion of our electorate, of the potential electorate, is actually represented. I don't know that we can say that we want to go in the direction of mandatory voting. There are countries that have mandatory voting, and in some cases it works okay, in some cases it doesn't. And I actually completely respect the idea of not voting because you don't feel that your vote makes a difference, that in the end it's not going to change anything. I don't agree with it, but I respect that people have the right to do that. Now, like with Jason, who says often in national elections he doesn't vote, I would never say that shouldn't be your right, that you should be forced to vote. I would want to convince you that it actually does make sense to vote. And one of the best pieces of evidence we see is that from everywhere, from presidential elections all the way down ballot, when voter turnout is on balance lower, we see it easier or more likely that the more conservative candidate wins. So while, yes, you can always make the argument that me individually as a voter, I as a voter don't make a difference. Well, yeah, if you alone didn't vote, it might not change any particular outcome. But the idea that voting doesn't matter, I find to be crazy. I think it's embarrassing that voter turnouts are so low.
Yeah, so I will say that I have never voted in a presidential election.
Yep.
I have voted in many local elections for things that locally I felt very strongly about.
Yep.
But to elaborate on that, it's not that I don't feel that my vote doesn't count. I feel like it's very important to vote, and I feel that the people that feel strongly about a candidate should vote, especially even if they think they're voting kind of the whole, let's say, Yankees versus Red Sox example, you voting for the person that you don't want to win, or voting against the person you don't want to win makes a big difference. And I heard an interesting thing writing in this morning about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of all people, actually in favor of people not voting, saying that if you aren't actually educated, you don't actually know what these politicians are standing for, you shouldn't vote. But
yeah,
I don't agree with that wholeheartedly.
I knew he took that position. I tend not to agree with that. When someone says, look at all the people having kids, that really should be, there should really be a test for parenting. The problem is the application of that will disproportionately hurt poor and minority people. And then you're basically creating a system which is going to actually further lead to more of one race of kids being born than another. I think it's very, very dangerous, although I see people all the time who should not be having kids. The problem is in the application of a lot of these ideas. A test for voting. This is one of the main things, that if you are a citizen, you get to vote. And it is, while I completely understand the concept of we have so many people who don't even understand the policies of the candidates, they maybe have never even heard, they're just voting a party line or they're completely clueless. Believe me, I get it. I've spoken to them when we interview people. But voting is a right for citizens, period. And, unfortunately, there are times where you can lose that right, including through the commission of certain crimes. But I think that it is very dangerous. And I think some of what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has written is interesting. I couldn't disagree more with that.
Something else I found very interesting, I heard another podcast about how people who have guardians have to express that they want to vote in order to vote. And this is coming up in California because there's something like 30,000 people there with guardians. And they were similarly asking, should we test these people to test that they have the comprehensive abilities, the ability to think and understand to vote? That's a tough card to play.
I think it is very dangerous when we go in that direction. To finalize my answer to the question, elections are legitimate even when you might have 40% voter turnout. It just really sucks that more people are not getting engaged because it is not truly a representative result. Faye wrote in saying, can you list some of your favorite fiction authors? I will do this. There's so many. This is almost like saying, what's your favorite book? And how could I possibly ever answer that? Some of my favorite authors. In the sci-fi side, Arthur C. Clarke, whose picture you were seeing here, author of the 2001, not even trilogy, it's a quadrilogy, 4 books in that series. Author of the Rama series, author of so many other great books. Definitely one of my favorite sci-fi authors. Neil Stephenson, who wrote the book Snow Crash, and more recently wrote Seven Eves, and another one whose name I'm forgetting. I've read most of Neil Stephenson's stuff. Absolutely fantastic. Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein. Love these authors and so many others in the sci-fi world. I really like both Raymond Chandler and Eric Ambler, both of whom wrote in the earlier part of the 20th century, although I believe Raymond Chandler slightly later. Some of the great sort of crime, detective, intrigue stories, love them. And the sort of descendants from them include both John le Carré and Robert Ludlum. Robert Ludlum, of course, very well known for the Bourne trilogy. Love those, getting into a sort of different thriller genre there. I'm just speaking off the top of my head. There are just so many authors that I absolutely love. I really liked Henning Mankell's work, the late Swedish crime detective fiction author whose character, Kurt Wallander, sort of very interesting and unusual police officer, detective, investigator. And I know I'm just missing so many here. It's just, it's crazy how many I'm missing, but those are some authors I like.
Yeah, I've been lately into kind of adventure, historic novels, probably more biographies almost. Right now I'm reading Goran Korap's, his accounts of scaling Everest and many of the peaks of the world, and how this one point he actually says in the book, he's like, I wish to die right now. In this moment, I wish it were all over because I've lived the most productive and fulfilling life ever. But somehow in that moment, he like turns from that straight to, I'm going to survive though, because there's more to live. So, but yeah, I would say I'm big into those types of books. I've been reading a lot of John Muir and his accounts of the Sierra and kind of traversing all these spaces that I've traveled myself. And
so you're less into fiction, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm more into nonfiction, more into biography and realities, I guess.
Some other authors that I like, I mean, Agatha Christie is absolutely fantastic. I've read quite a bit of Dostoevsky, and it's just such a different experience. It's so difficult to even say, here are my favorite authors. And I know I'm forgetting so many. Alan Furst, F-U-R-S-T, is a guy who writes really good World War II era historical fiction. So it's taking place in the atmosphere of World War II, but they are fictional stories about individual characters that he invents. It's a really long list. What I recommend you do is check out davidpakman.com/recommendations, because a lot of my book recommendations there are by some of my favorite Christian, I'm sorry, not Christian authors. I am not into Christian fiction. Fiction authors. Christian and fiction are very similar words. Could we call that a Freudian slip? I think we can.
I think so. Maybe you're into Hasidic novels too. Who knows?
Let's move on. Oh, that reminds me. There is such a great novel by Michael, I believe the last name is pronounced Chabon, The Yiddish Policeman's Union. And it is an awesome Alaska detective novel. It is absolutely fantastic. I recommended it. It's on my recommendations page. Not exactly Hasidic fiction, but at least the word Yiddish is in there. Chris wrote to me and said, hey, David, can you go into detail on your show about your rationale behind why you invested in Tesla? How high do you think the stock could go? What are the reasons you think it could go higher? Do you agree it could be a riskier stock because it's not yet turning a profit or meeting demand? I understand you're not a financial advisor, but it would be interesting to hear your take. I'll deal with this, but I need to address once again. I am not a financial advisor. Nothing I say on the show is advice in terms of investment, and that full stop. Nothing I'm going to say is investment advice. I basically don't invest in individual stocks. I have very little individual stock ownership, and I've talked many times. I think really very few people can time the market, and very few people can really pick stocks. And if you look at this, just as many hedge funds and whatever else are underperforming the broader indexes as overperforming. And that's just basically an example of the reality that over the longer and longer term that you look at this, you are going to be better off just with mutual funds that follow indices. That being said, I believe in what Elon Musk is doing. I believe that big picture, Tesla is a company that is going to borrow a word from Donald Trump here, win, whatever that means. And I get it. You could come to me and say, the thing is, David, Tesla's not even turning a profit yet. And already a dozen, 10, maybe more like 8 different car manufacturers are going to have vehicles that are essentially just as self-piloting as Tesla by 2018 or at the latest 2020. So they're not even doing anything innovative yet. So I don't think it's about that. I think it's more about believing in Elon Musk's track record, believing in the approach that he is taking to the company. And you know what? It's pretty damn risky. Anytime you invest in an individual stock, it is risky. I invested very little in it. I don't know whether in the end I will end up making any money or not. I am more in the Warren Buffett camp of the ideal holding period is forever. And that's it. I'm not a stock trader. I have very little money in stocks. So yeah, I mean, I give my disclosure anytime we talk about Tesla and say, full disclosure, I'm a shareholder here, but it is more because I like to invest in companies that big picture, I believe are doing things that will be big, that will be huge overall. And it's not about looking at, for me, at their profit and loss statement or anything like that. So that's the big picture. I wish I could say more. I don't know how high it could go. I am overall bullish on the Tesla stock price. Who knows what the timeline would be? Could be 5 years, could be 10 years. I really don't know. I'm not really making a case for people. Not only did I say, Jason, that this is a disclaimer, that it's not financial advice, I'm not even telling people to invest in Tesla. I'm basically saying I did, and I'm just planning on holding it indefinitely.
I was told one of the things that was very important about them entering the market and becoming a company is they kind of forced all these other car manufacturers to step into this market as well. And there's many other viable, cheap options like the Leaf.
Yeah.
It forced a lot of, like, Ford has hybrids. Everyone has a hybrid now because they need to compete with Tesla, and actually at a better price point might not be as sexy and as cool as, this suicide door or the,
yeah, it's definitely not as cool as that.
Yeah. But at least it forced them to do it.
Yeah. I agree with you, and that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. And you know what? I might lose all my money, and that's why I say very clearly, this is not investment advice. We will take a break on the bonus show today. Should capitalist economics be the only economics taught in school? India's richest man offers free 4G internet to 1 billion people, and Obama announces $90 million to clear Laos's, I think that's the right pronunciation, unexploded bombs. Those stories and more on the bonus show. Remember, davidpakman.com/membership is how you sign up and get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.